Officer Miller felt the familiar surge of authority as he approached the kid slouched on the park bench. The teenager didn't belong in this pristine, wealthy neighborhood, and Miller was going to make sure he knew it. He ignored the boy's polite answers, twisting his words until he had a reason to cuff him, unaware that the small lens on his chest was recording every lie he told. That recording would not only free the boy, but become the very evidence that would later have Miller sitting in a courtroom, covering his face in shame. We've all seen videos like this surface online, but what really happens after the camera stops rolling and the system takes over? Stay with us to discover how a single piece of technology turned the tables on a man who believed he was completely untouchable. The afternoon sun was warm on Darius's shoulders as he sat on the bench, the smooth wood cool against his jeans. He'd found the perfect spot in Crestwood Park, a place with manicured lawns and old oak trees that looked like something out of a movie. He was sketching one of them, the cross-hatching of the bark taking shape under his pencil, when a shadow fell over his notebook. He looked up into the face of a police officer. The man was built like a refrigerator, with a hard set to his jaw and eyes that scanned Darius not as a person, but as a problem to be solved. Darius offered a small, respectful nod. "Afternoon, officer." "What are you doing here?" the officer Miller asked. His voice wasn't curious. It was accusatory. "Just drawing, sir. I'm waiting for my mom. She cleans one of the houses over on Sycamore Lane." Darius gestured vaguely with his pencil. Miller's eyes narrowed, taking in Darius's gray hoodie, his worn jeans, and his dreadlocks. It was a uniform that, in Miller's mind, didn't belong in a neighborhood where the average home cost more than he'd make in a decade. "Waiting for your mom, huh? You got any ID on you?" "Yes, sir." Darius carefully placed his notebook on the bench and reached for his wallet. He handed over his student ID from Northgate High. Miller glanced at it and scoffed. "Northgate? That's 5 miles from here. You walked all the way over just to sit on a bench?" "The bus drops off about a block away. I like this park. It's quiet." Every answer Darius gave was polite, truthful, and calm. But Miller wasn't listening to the words. He was listening for an excuse. He saw a kid from the bad part of town, sitting in a place reserved for the wealthy, and his internal script had already been written. "You look like you're casing properties to me," Miller stated, his tone flat. "Loitering with intent. I want you to stand up. Slowly." A knot of ice formed in Darius's stomach. This was going wrong. Fast. "Officer, I promise you I'm just waiting for my mom. She gets off in 20 minutes. "I said, stand up," Miller's voice boomed, startling a woman walking her dog 50 yards away. Darius rose to his feet, his hands held slightly out to his sides to show he wasn't a threat. He was confused and scared, and his movements were hesitant. Miller saw it as resistance. In a swift, practiced motion, he grabbed Darius's arm, twisted it behind his back, and slammed him face first against the back of the bench. The corner of Darius's notebook dug into his ribs. A sharp, metallic click echoed in the quiet park as the handcuffs closed around his wrists. "You're under arrest for loitering and resisting an officer," Miller grunted, yanking Darius upright. For a 17-year-old kid who had never even had detention, the world had just tilted off its axis. He was marched to the patrol car, the quiet judgment of the dog walker's stare burning into his back, and was shoved into the hard plastic seat. The door slammed shut, and for the first time in his life, Darius felt utterly hopeless. 2 hours later, he was sitting in a cold, gray holding cell when the door clanked open. A woman with tired eyes, sharp features, and a briefcase that had seen better days stood there. "Darius, I'm Alani Coro. I'm your public defender." Alani had seen 100 kids like Darius, shuffled through the system on flimsy charges. But when she sat with him in the small, airless interview room, she saw something different. He wasn't defiant or angry. He was just broken. He recounted the events in the park with a detached monotone, as if he were describing a movie he'd seen. He believed it was already over. It was his word, the word of a black kid from Northgate, against the word of a decorated police officer. He knew who the world would believe. After their meeting, Alani got her hands on Officer Miller's official report. Reading it made her blood boil. It was a masterpiece of fiction. Miller wrote that he'd observed Darius peering into residential backyards and acting suspiciously. He claimed that when confronted, Darius became verbally aggressive and used profanities, and that he had tensed up and physically resisted when Miller tried to detain him. It was a perfect, self-contained narrative designed to justify the arrest and ensure a conviction. Armed with nothing but Darius's quiet testimony, Alani went to the prosecutor's office. She met with a senior prosecutor named Thompson, a man whose cynical outlook had been hardened by decades in the system. He listened to Alani's plea with a dismissive air. "Miss Coro," he said, leaning back in his chair, "I have the sworn statement of a 10-year veteran officer with a spotless record. What do you have?" "The story of a kid who was somewhere he shouldn't have been." "He was in a public park, Mr. Thompson. That's not a crime." Thompson sighed, as if explaining something to a child. "Look, I'll make you a deal. As a favor, your client pleads guilty to the loitering charge. We'll drop the resisting arrest. He'll get probation, maybe some community service. It's the best he's going to get." Alani's jaw tightened. They were trying to saddle a completely innocent teenager with a criminal record just to close a file. "We're not taking the deal. My client is innocent." Thompson shrugged, already turning back to the mountain of paperwork on his desk. "Fine. Have it your way. Don't say I didn't warn you when the jury sides with the cop. You're wasting everyone's time." Alani walked out of his office feeling a profound sense of defeat. The system wasn't just broken, it was designed to work this way. When she told Darius about the plea deal, she saw a flicker of something in his eyes. He was considering it. He just wanted the nightmare to be over. And for a moment, Alani feared he was right. Without any evidence, fighting this felt like trying to punch a brick wall. But Alani wasn't a quitter. She knew that a he said, she said battle in court was a losing proposition. She had to find something tangible, something Miller couldn't lie his way out of. So she started digging. She spent her nights at the public defender's office, long after everyone else had gone home, fueled by stale coffee and a stubborn refusal to let an innocent kid's future be destroyed. She pulled every file she could find on Officer Frank Miller. A pattern began to emerge. Over the past 2 years, Miller had made 15 arrests for suspicious behavior or loitering in the Crestwood neighborhood. All 15 individuals were young men of color. 13 of them had taken plea deals, just like the one offered to Darius. 2 had filed official complaints against Miller for harassment. Both complaints had been investigated internally by Miller's own precinct and were dismissed as unfounded. Officer Miller wasn't just a cop having a bad day. He was a predator who used his badge to terrorize people he felt didn't belong. This wasn't just about Darius anymore. It was about all the others who didn't have a voice. Still, a pattern wasn't proof. Alani was back at square one. Frustrated, she went through Darius's case file for what felt like the 100th time. Her eyes scanned the mundane inventory list from Miller's patrol car: flashlight, first aid kit, flare gun. It was just standard procedure. But then she saw it. A small checkbox at the bottom of the page, next to the letters BWC. A handwritten checkmark was inside the box. BWC active, body-worn camera. A jolt went through her. It was a long shot. Cops sometimes forgot to turn them on, or the footage was often useless. But it was a chance. It was the first glimmer of light she'd seen in a very dark tunnel. The next morning, she filed a formal discovery motion with the court, demanding any and all body-worn camera footage from Officer Miller from the day of Darius's arrest. The pushback was immediate and fierce. The city's legal department acting on behalf of the police union, sent their top lawyer, a man named Peterson, who was known for his aggressive tactics. First, he filed a response arguing that Alani's request was a speculative fishing expedition designed to harass a decorated officer. The judge, a no-nonsense woman named Eleanor Carmichael, quickly overruled him, stating that footage of an arrest was standard and relevant evidence. Alani allowed herself a small moment of victory, but it was short-lived. A week later, she was back in court, standing opposite Peterson. He addressed the judge with a look of practiced regret. "Your Honor," he began, "we have made every effort to comply with the court's order. Unfortunately, it appears the video file from the time of the arrest was corrupted during a routine data transfer. The footage is irretrievable." Alani felt like she'd been punched in the gut. Corrupted. It was the oldest trick in the book, a convenient technical glitch that made inconvenient evidence disappear. The prosecutor, Thompson, looked on with a smug expression. In the gallery, Darius slumped in his seat, the last bit of hope draining from his face. It was over. The one thing that could have proven his innocence was gone. The brick wall she'd been punching had just grown 10 feet taller. But as Alani looked at Peterson's smooth, confident face, she didn't see regret. She saw a lie. And she wasn't going to let it stand. She knew she was taking a huge risk, one that could get her sanctioned by the court, but she had to try. "Your Honor," Alani said, her voice ringing with a conviction she didn't entirely feel. "The defense does not accept that the footage is simply corrupted. We believe it was intentionally tampered with." Peterson and Thompson erupted in protest, but Judge Carmichael held up a hand for silence. She looked at Alani, her expression unreadable. "That is a very serious accusation, Miss Coro. Do you have anything to back it up?" "No, Your Honor, not yet," Alani admitted. "But if the court would grant us a new motion, not for the video file itself, but for the camera's internal data logs and the server's transfer records for that day, those logs are unalterable. They will show us exactly what happened to that file." It was a bold, unprecedented request. She was essentially asking to audit the police department's data management. Peterson called it an outrageous overreach, but Judge Carmichael was an old-school judge who despised the idea of anyone, including the police, hiding evidence from her courtroom. After a long, tense silence, she made her decision. "Motion granted," she said, her gavel striking the wood with a sharp crack. "The police IT department will produce those logs within 48 hours. The logs arrived in Alani's email as a massive, incomprehensible spreadsheet of data. She called in a favor from a friend who worked in cybersecurity. For hours, they sat in her tiny office, fueled by pizza and energy drinks, tracing the digital journey of a single video file. And then, at 2 a.m, her friend pointed to a line of code on the screen. "There it is," he said. The logs showed the video file had been successfully uploaded to the server. An hour later, a user with Officer Frank Miller's login credentials had accessed the file. A command had then been issued to flag the file for permanent deletion, but the command had failed. A minor server error had caused the deletion to hang, leaving the file intact but hidden in a recovery partition, invisible to a standard search. It wasn't corrupted. It was a botched cover-up. The day of the trial, the courtroom was thick with tension. The prosecution presented their case, and at its center was Officer Miller. On the stand, he was the image of a confident, professional lawman. He recounted the lies from his report, painting Darius as a defiant, threatening presence that had forced him to act. Then it was Alani's turn. She walked slowly to the lectern, her heart pounding. "Officer Miller," she began calmly, "you testified that my client was aggressive and non-compliant. Is that correct?" "Yes, it is." "And you stand by every word of the official report you filed?" 100%, Miller said, leaning into the microphone. Alani paused, letting his answer hang in the air. Then she turned to the judge. Your Honor, the defense has evidence that directly contradicts the officer's testimony. With the court's permission, I'd like to play Exhibit A. The lights in the courtroom dimmed and the large monitors flickered to life. The video was clear, the audio crisp. It showed a peaceful park on a sunny afternoon. It showed a teenage boy, Darius, sitting on a bench, sketching in a notebook. The jury heard Officer Miller's aggressive leading questions. They heard Darius's calm, polite, and respectful answers. They saw Darius complying with every order, even as confusion and fear grew on his face. They saw Miller, unprovoked, grab the boy and slam him against the bench. They saw the truth. In the silent courtroom, the only sound was the audio from the video. Miller, on the witness stand, turned a ghastly shade of white. The prosecutor, Thompson, stared at the screen, his mouth slightly agape, the look of a man who realized he'd been played for a fool. When the video ended, Alani didn't have to say a word. She simply walked back to her table and sat down next to Darius. After Miller was excused from the stand, he stumbled back to the prosecution's table. As the lawyers approached the bench for a sidebar, Miller sat down heavily, the weight of his lies finally crushing him. He dropped his head into his hands, his whole body shaking, a portrait of a man whose world had just been obliterated by his own actions. Judge Carmichael returned to her seat, her face like thunder. "In light of the evidence just presented," she announced, her voice echoing in the stunned silence, "all charges against Mr. Darius Cole are hereby dismissed with prejudice." She looked directly at Darius. "On behalf of this court, Mr. Cole, I want to offer you a sincere apology." She then turned her gaze to the prosecutor's table, where Miller was still hiding his face. "And I am ordering the district attorney's office to immediately open a criminal investigation into Officer Frank Miller for felony perjury and official misconduct." 6 months later, Darius stood in that same spot in Crestwood Park. But this time, he wasn't alone. He was surrounded by a small group of younger kids from his neighborhood, each with a sketchbook and pencil. He was teaching them how to see the world not as a place to fear, but as a subject to be captured. The settlement he'd received from the city was now in a college fund, with enough left over to start this small, free art program. He'd found a way to turn the ugliest moment of his life into something beautiful. Across the lawn, Alani Coro watched him for a moment, a rare, proud smile on her face. Her victory in court had sent shockwaves through the department, and Frank Miller was now serving a 2-year prison sentence. It hadn't fixed the whole system, but for one innocent kid, it had made all the difference. She gave Darius a final encouraging nod before turning away, her mind already on the next case, the next fight. "So what do you think is the right way to handle police misconduct? Should a single mistake, even a malicious one, end a career? Or is there a path to redemption for officers who lie?" Let us know your thoughts on this in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please consider liking and subscribing. Every bit of support helps us continue to bring these important narratives to light.